What would you do if a dying man looked you in the eye and said, "Marry her, protect her, promise me"? And the woman he was talking about had no idea any of it was coming. No idea that the quiet man, standing in the back of her cousin's funeral, wasn't grieving. He was watching her, not the way people watch strangers, the way a man watches someone he has already decided to keep, without meaning to, without warning. She thought his name was Raphael. She thought he was a friend of Nolan's. She did not know he was 500 years old. She did not know he hadn't made a real promise in over a century. The Vampire King had agreed to marry his dead friend's chubby cousin out of loyalty. What he had not prepared for, in all 500 years of preparing for things, was what came next. Her name was Angela Kerr, 29 years old, brown skin, soft features, black hair pulled back, the way you pull it back when you've stopped expecting anyone to notice it down. She worked the front desk at a French Quarter hotel, polite, efficient, invisible in the way that people who are too kind for their environment tend to become invisible. She read thick books on her lunch breaks. She dreamed of becoming a teacher. She made very good Cajun rice at midnight when the loneliness got loud. She had been, since the age of 9, essentially alone. Her mother died when Angela was still small enough to believe adults were supposed to stay. Her father left shortly after, not all at once, slowly, appointment by unanswered appointment, until one day there was simply no one left to call. She was raised by her Aunt Miriam in a house where she was tolerated the way you tolerate a draft. "You're a weed, not a flower," Miriam had told her once. "Weeds grow where they're not wanted." Angela never forgot it. She spent the next 20 years trying to take up less space. And then Nolan got sick. Nolan called her every day from the hospital, read books with her over the phone, made her laugh the week he couldn't get out of bed. He was 34 years old and dying. Even then, he spent his energy worrying about her. "Promise me you won't disappear after I'm gone," he told her, 3 days before the end. She promised. She didn't know he was, at that exact moment, extracting a very different promise from someone else entirely. The funeral was held on a Tuesday, St. Louis Cathedral, magnolias blooming outside, like the world hadn't gotten the memo. Miriam sat in the front pew in a black dress that looked freshly pressed. She had not visited Nolan once while he was sick. Angela sat in the third row, alone, with their eyes were watching God in her lap. The same copy she'd had since she was 16. Spine cracked from rereading, margins soft with pencil notes. Inside the front cover, she found an envelope she hadn't put there. Nolan's handwriting, her name in blue ink. A small, smiley face in the corner, his signature even at the end. She didn't open it. She pressed her thumb along the sealed edge and made herself breathe. Not here, not in front of them. She would not give the Kerr family her grief. What she couldn't have noticed, the man standing at the very back of the cathedral had not moved in 40 minutes. Pale gray eyes, white hair, still as marble. Watching her hold that book the way you hold something, when you need to remember you are a person who loves things. Thinking. For the first time in longer than most civilizations last. She is real. In a room full of performance, she is the only real thing. He drove her home that evening. She let him. too hollowed out to ask the right questions, too accustomed to accepting small kindnesses without examining them. His car was black, immaculate, silent in a way that felt less like silence and more like restraint. The city slid past in rain and amber streetlight. When they reached her building, he walked her to the door without being asked. He stood in the rain. He looked at her. "Nolan made me promise to take care of you. I don't break promises. I need you to hear what that means." She looked at him, really looked, for the first time since the cathedral. His eyes were pale, almost colorless, winter light through very old glass. Something in them had nothing to do with grief or obligation. It was recognition, as if she was somehow exactly who he expected to find. She said, "All right," quietly, practically, already prepared for it to cost her. She had no idea that the man at her door could hear her heartbeat from 6 feet away, that it sounded, to him, like nothing he had encountered in 5 centuries. She had no idea what was already circling her bloodline, what Miriam actually was beneath the black dress and borrowed grief. But she was about to find out. The moment she said, "All right," the clock started. Stay with this story. Because what Nolan knew, what he protected Angela from her entire life, is the secret that changes everything. Before we go any further, I need to ask you something. Angela spent 20 years shrinking herself for people who never even noticed she was there. She made herself smaller, quieter, less. Not one of them ever looked up. If someone in your life ever made you feel invisible, type 1 in the comments right now. If you've ever been Angela, type 1. Because I have a feeling this comment section is going to be full of ones, and every single one of them matters. The next morning, an invitation arrived. No return address. Heavy cream paper. 3 words in ink so dark it looked almost black. "Come to dinner." At the bottom, a restaurant name she recognized. She had walked past it 100 times and never once felt like she was allowed to go inside. She went. That was the night Raphael told her what Nolan had asked. That was the night everything Angela Kerr thought she understood about her own life began to unravel. Mororo had no sign above the door. A restaurant tucked between a jazz bar and a pharmacy. The kind of place that didn't advertise because the people it wanted always found their way in. The maitre d' knew her name before she gave it. Raphael sat down, did not reach for the menu. "Nolan asked me to marry you," he said. "He asked you to, what?" "Marry you, formally, legally, 1 year minimum, financial security, protection, and a name that keeps certain people at a distance." Protection from what? From the world Nolan was part of. He asked me to continue keeping you safe from it. Angela looked at her hands. Arrangement. The word sat in her chest like something with weight. She thought of Miriam's voice, her father's car pulling out of the driveway for the last time, hospital waiting rooms, lunch breaks spent reading alone. "He worried about you constantly," Raphael said. "He said you had spent your entire life caring for other people, and no one had ever bothered to notice." She spent a week thinking about it. Then she reread Nolan's letter 3 times, sitting cross-legged on her bed at 2 in the morning. "Angie, I know this is going to sound insane. Trust Raphael. Not because he's perfect. He is, in fact, deeply strange and sometimes frightening. But he keeps his word. In a world that has never kept its word to you, that matters more than you know, you deserve to stop shrinking. Love Nolan, P.S. He makes very good tea. Don't let him pretend he doesn't care. He does, he just needs time. She called the number Raphael had written on the back of the dinner receipt. I'll do it, but I'm doing this for Nolan. Not because I need saving, she paused, because I am so tired of saying I'm fine. A silence, then, all right. He used her own word. She suspected it was deliberate. The ceremony took 11 minutes. A notary. 2 witnesses she'd never met. She wore a navy dress she already owned. The notary mispronounced her name twice and didn't notice. Angela noticed. She had spent a lifetime cataloging the small ways she went unregistered. When it was over, Raphael pressed his lips to her forehead. Slow, deliberate, like a benediction. She stood very still. The penthouse had high ceilings, exposed brick, bookshelves floor to ceiling on 3 walls. Baldwin and Toni Morrison, Octavia Butler and Borges. He reads, she thought. Something shifted. The first week, they avoided each other with the practiced care of 2 people who are used to not burdening others. She cooked in the evenings, left a plate on the counter, second-guessed it, left it anyway. The first night, it was untouched. The second night, the plate was empty, clean, placed precisely in the drying rack. She didn't mention it, neither did he. They ate together for the first time on the 5th day. She was making tea. He sat with a book open in front of him and did not read it. She set a mug in front of him without asking. I know you drink it. The kettle handle is warm in the mornings. Spearmint, if you have it. She did. She had bought it without knowing why. They sat across from each other in the kitchen light, not talking. It was the most peaceful Angela had felt in months. Why do you read about us? He was looking at the spine of a book she'd left on the counter. A history of vampire mythology in Southern literature. It's what I want to teach, the mythology, the metaphor underneath it. Immortality as loneliness. Every vampire story is really about someone who outlived everything that made life bearable. He was very still. My mother used to say the only cure for a long life was a short reason to keep going. She sounds wise. She was exhausted. She worked in a mill in 1701. Wisdom and exhaustion look very similar from the inside. 1701. Angela did the mathematics quietly, said nothing, but the number sat in her chest like a key turning. It happened on a Thursday night. She was slicing tomatoes when the knife slipped. In the adjoining room, Raphael went absolutely motionless. He walked to the kitchen doorway. The expression on his face was something controlled with great effort. Please go to your room and close the door. She went. She stood on the other side and listened to the silence. Not fear, something much more dangerous than fear. He is real. He is fighting himself, and he does not want to hurt me. After a long time, slipped under her door, a small white cloth, antiseptic, a single spearmint leaf, no note. She knocked on his study door at 11 o'clock. I want to understand what just happened. How old are you? 512. Nolan knew, she said. Since he was 17, his great-grandfather was a hunter. And he still stood between you and a silver bullet. Yes. Angela looked at the Baldwin spines. Nolan used to call and read over the phone, Baldwin sometimes. Once an entire chapter of a refrigerator repair manual, because it was all he had, and we were both laughing too hard to stop. I know, Raphael said. Nolan read Baldwin to me too. He always knew which story a person needed to hear. Miriam and Tricia arrived on a Wednesday morning, standing in the lobby when Angela came home. We heard you got married. We came to check on you. Not congratulations, check on you. Whatever arrangement you've gotten yourself into, Miriam said, you can come home. Home. Angela thought of Miriam's house, the table where she ate last and spoke only when acknowledged. Then she thought of a penthouse kitchen at 9 in the evening. Spearmint tea, the sound of pages turning. I am home, she said, and walked to the elevator. Her hands were trembling, but her voice had not shaken, not once. He arrived on a Friday afternoon. Angela felt it before she saw him. The drop in room temperature she had learned to associate with a specific kind of presence. Tall, dark suit, eyes too pale. He walked to the desk and leaned forward. Angela Kerr, or is it Angela something else now? I'm a colleague of your husband's. Tell him Cassian sends his regards. And tell him that what belongs to the council doesn't stay private forever, no matter how tenderly it's kept. She held his gaze. I'll pass that along. He had expected fear. She had learned not to flinch. 20 minutes later, Tricia walked out of the elevator. And so you married a vampire king, and you're still working reception. Set it at the precise volume to carry to the nearest 3 guests. Does he just imagine someone different when he looks at you? The lobby went quiet. Angela felt the old pull. Make yourself smaller. Then she heard the elevator. Raphael crossed the marble floor and came to stand beside her desk. He looked at Angela first, just a second, long enough to read the angle of her chin, the brightness in her eyes. Then he looked at Tricia. You will not speak to my wife like that again. I married her because she is extraordinary, not because of a promise, because she is the only person I have encountered in a very long time who is genuinely, entirely real. Something older and colder surfaced in his eyes, just long enough to be felt. Tricia took one step back, then another, then she left. In the car, in the rain. Before you arrived, there was a man named Cassian. He said something about the council. Raphael's hands on the wheel went very still. When she finished describing him, the silence had weight. Your blood has a property that shouldn't exist. To hostile vampires, it has a calming effect, something the council has been searching for across 2 centuries of faction wars. To me, he stopped. It is the only thing in 5 centuries that has felt worth exercising restraint for. Because losing control would mean losing this, whatever this is. Angela looked at her hands. She thought of the spearmint leaf under her door, the drying rack, the forehead kiss. Tell me about the council, she said. He told her. It took 40 minutes. The rain continued. There are also things I should have told you. Security cameras in your building. Before we were married. Entrances, exits, the lobby. I needed to know you were safe. For how long? Since the funeral. Since I walked you to your door and could not simply trust that the world would leave you alone. She thought of her small apartment, the books, the midnight rice. She had believed she was entirely alone. You watched over me, she said. Yes, because Nolan asked you to. A pause. At first, he said. Later, she knocked on his study door. I need to say something. When I agreed to this, I told myself I was doing it for Nolan, that it was practical. I was lying to myself. I tell myself I'm fine. No one has to stay. I believe it because believing it is easier. She met his eyes. I want to be seen. I have always wanted to be seen. He stood. He crossed the room. I have been alive for 512 years. I learned to want very little, because wanting things across centuries teaches you that things end. I stopped wanting things sometime in the 1800s. He took her hands. And then you put 12 books on an empty shelf, left a plate on my counter, made spearmint tea in my kitchen, and something in me that I had deliberately retired began, without my permission, to want again. That is the truth. I am not apologizing for it either. For the first time in 29 years of fading into rooms, Angela Kerr felt she was the only thing in this penthouse that mattered. It started with the lights. The penthouse lost power at 11:47. Not a storm, a clean, deliberate cut. Something that knew where the breaker was. Angela was reading in her room. She heard the electricity die. She heard Raphael move. Fast, faster than she had ever heard him move. The velocity of it told her everything. Angela, get to the interior room, now. She was already moving. She knew what the interior room meant. Small study off the kitchen, no windows, reinforced door. He had shown her on her second day. She had thought he was being overly cautious. She had not thought that since Cassian. She made it to the hallway. She did not make it to the room. The window at the end of the corridor came through all at once. Not broken, removed, clean as surgery. 3 figures moved through the space with the efficiency of people who had done this before and expected to finish quickly. Angela pressed herself against the wall. Raphael was already between her and them. She had seen him still, controlled, managing 5 centuries of restraint in small domestic rooms. She had never seen him fight. It was not what the books described, not elegant or cinematic. It was pure consequence, 5 centuries of survival expressing itself without apology. He was extraordinary. He was also outnumbered. The first silver round caught him on the left side, the ribs, where the old scar lived. He made no sound, didn't go down, but she saw the slight giving in his stance, the way one hand dropped a fraction. Silver in a vampire's bloodstream, she knew what that meant. Not instant, but inevitable. Unless she ran. Not away, through the kitchen, toward the pantry. 3 weeks ago. In the early morning hours when she couldn't sleep, she had made notes in the margins of a notebook she kept beside the spearmint. Silver toxicity, neutralizing agents, traditional remedies. Her hands were shaking. She noted this, set it aside, kept moving. Yarrow, dried calendula, the black salt Vera had left as a housewarming gift with the comment, just in case, which Angela had thought was eccentric, and now understood was not eccentric at all. She found the copper pot, filled it. She worked the way she worked everything that mattered, methodically, without performance, with the focus that had gotten her through every hard thing since age 9. You are not doing anything remarkable, she told herself. You are making something. You made Cajun rice the night Nolan's hospice called. You make things. This is what you do. When drops of her own blood fell in, the cut on her index finger reopening against the copper rim. She didn't plan it. It simply happened. The mixture changed. She stared at it for 1 second. Exactly one. Then she picked it up and went back. The penthouse was smoke and heat and chaos. 2 attackers were down. Raphael was standing, barely, his back against the Baldwin shelf, one hand braced on the frame. His color was wrong. The gray-white of something that had absorbed more damage than it was built to hold. The 3rd attacker was circling. The council thanks you for your service, Raphael, he said, almost conversationally. Angela walked in from the kitchen. She didn't announce herself. She walked directly to Raphael, put herself beside him, not behind, beside, and held out the copper pot. Drink this. He looked at her. In the economy of his face, she saw recognition, fear for her, and underneath both, the expression from the car in the rain, from the study with his hands around hers. You are the only real thing. Angela. I know what's in it. I know what I did. Drink it. He drank it. The 3rd attacker stopped circling, looked at the pot, at Angela, at Raphael, took a step backward. He had been briefed on the protected human wife, the woman described as quiet, small, unlikely to complicate things. He had not been briefed on this. Raphael straightened, all at once, the way something returns to its true form when the thing constraining it is removed. Leave, tell the council, tell Cassian, that what they sent tonight was insufficient. The next time they move against this household, the answer will be the same, and it will not be as restrained. The attacker left. The penthouse was very quiet. Angela set the copper pot on the floor. She sat down beside it. Her legs had decided, now that the crisis was resolved, to stop cooperating. Raphael slid down the bookshelf and sat beside her, shoulder to shoulder, in the silence of 2 people who have just been through something that rearranges the furniture of the self. After a long time. How did you know? I've been reading. You put your own blood in it. Yes. You knew what that would do. She looked at her hands, at the copper residue, the small cut, the evidence of her own choices. I knew it would make it stronger. I didn't know everything it would do, but I knew you were in danger, and I had the only thing that could help. She stopped. I didn't want to lose you, so I didn't. He told her the rest later, when Declan had come and gone and the broken window was covered. Your blood has a property that shouldn't exist, not in humans, not in anything the council has documented. It neutralizes aggression in vampires, not weakening, calming, the way you calm a wound. The council has been searching for something like it for 2 centuries. And Miriam knew, Angela said. Her bloodline goes back to hunters who documented it. She didn't understand what she had until Nolan grew close to me and she started paying attention. So she reported it. She traded it, her husband's construction contracts, which I have restructured, in exchange for information about you. Angela sat with that. The weight of betrayal by someone who had never pretended to love you, which should be easier to absorb and wasn't. because there is a specific grief in confirming that even the grudging tolerance was transactional. She sold me, Angela thought. I was inventory she hadn't found a use for yet. She thought of Miriam's voice. You're a weed, not a flower. She thought of Nolan's letter. You deserve to stop shrinking. She thought of a copper pot, her own hands moving without hesitation. The certainty she had felt walking back into that room, that she was done with doorways. Don't act against her out of anger, Angela said. Act because it's the consequence of her choices. There's a difference. He looked at her. Yes, there is. Nolan always knew the difference, she said quietly. He carried her to bed that night. She wasn't injured, just completely emptied. He asked first. She said yes. She noted, drifting off, that she had never in 29 years simply let someone carry her anywhere. That saying yes, please to ordinary care, felt like a muscle she hadn't known was atrophied. She made a note to use it more. She woke at 7, coffee, spearmint. Pages turning from an armchair he had moved to the corner of her room while she slept. He stayed, she thought, not in the arrangement sense, in the way that means I was not willing to be in a different room from you tonight. He looked up when she moved, not startled, as if he had been aware of the exact moment she came back to herself. Good morning, she said. Good morning, he said. In the soft morning light, he looked, for the first time, like someone who had put something down. The arrangement, the 1 year, she said. I want to renegotiate. He was very still. To what terms? She looked at the Baldwin in his lap, the armchair he had moved, the spearmint on the nightstand, a mug, already made, close enough to reach without getting up. Indefinite. No exit date. Just this, whatever this is, for as long as we both decide to keep choosing it. The silence was the fullest kind. You understand what that means, what I am, what you've already started to become. I understand. I've read the books. I know what the path costs and that it isn't reversible. She met his eyes. I spent 29 years making myself smaller to survive people who didn't want me taking up space. I am done with that. Whatever I am becoming, I would rather be it fully, with you, than spend another year trying to remember to shrink. He closed the book, crossed the room, sat on the edge of the bed. Then we renegotiate. She exhaled, the first full exhale in approximately 29 years. He reached out and took her hands, cool, steady, careful. There are things I can do, with your full consent, that would give you more protection, more permanence. I know, she said. You've read about it. I've read everything. And she looked at their joined hands, the small cut, the copper residue still faint under her thumbnail. I'm not afraid, she said. She wasn't. The thing she had feared her whole life. Not darkness, not danger, but simply being seen and found wanting. That fear was gone. He had seen her. He had not looked away. For the first time in longer than she could count, she knew exactly what she had to do. The woman who once apologized for existing just saved the vampire king with her own hands, her own knowledge, and the courage that comes from having nothing left to prove. Stay, because what comes next is everything Nolan always believed was possible. The penthouse was repaired in 4 days. Angela decided she preferred the slightly darker shade of the refinished floor. Evidence of something survived tends to look better than evidence of nothing having happened at all. She was learning new things about herself. Temperature registered differently now. Her senses sharpened. Vera visited twice a week with the practical attitude of someone who had been half vampire for 40 years and found the subject entirely manageable. The spearmint, Angela discovered with private amusement, tasted exactly the same. Raphael began teaching her in the evenings, not formally. The kind of teacher who asks questions and waits genuinely for the answer. The evenings dissolved the way they always had. Books open, tea cooling, the city outside the high windows. One evening, watching him read, she thought, it was never the safety, it was the presence. Vera came on a Wednesday with a theory she'd been waiting to say. The calming property in your blood maps to a specific ancestral line from the Louisiana coast, something older than hunter blood, your mother's family. Nolan knew, not the science, but he spent 3 years trying to understand it before he ran out of time. He knew there was something in me worth protecting. He protected it by sending it to the one person he trusted with irreplaceable things. The invitation to the solstice gathering arrived on heavy cream cardstock. Angela wore the deep blue gown she'd bought 2 years ago for an event she ultimately hadn't attended. Hanging in her closet since then, like a small insistent argument that she was capable of being someone who went to things. She was, it turned out, capable. A woman approached them midway through the evening, the wife of a vampire senator. You're the one who made the antidote. Yes. I used to be a school teacher, 1887. The ones who didn't want to be elsewhere were the interesting ones. Most became remarkable. All of them remembered that someone had paid attention. Paying attention, Angela thought. That's the whole work. He found her on the terrace. He reached into his jacket and took out a small box. A locket, gold, oval. She opened it. On one side, Nolan's photograph, young, laughing at something outside the frame. On the other, a small folded paper. You were never invisible. You are the light in my darkness. Nolan gave me the photograph before he died. He said to give it to you when you were ready. The words, she asked. Mine, he said. She thought about a dying man, 34 years old, giving a photograph to the oldest person he knew and saying when she's ready, trusting without evidence that both of them would arrive at the same place from completely different directions. He gave us time. That was his gift. Dance with me, she said. There's always music in this city. You just have to be willing to hear it. He held out his hand. She took it. They danced on the terrace while the old families watched from inside, and the trumpet played its beautiful, indifferent song from the quarter. He told her about James Baldwin, the first time he read Giovanni's Room, alone in Paris in 1957. Nolan read me the part about the actual room, Angela said, and said, that's what it's like when you never let anyone in. The room gets smaller until nothing living can breathe in it. I thought he was talking about himself. He was talking about both of us. He was usually talking about everyone at once, Raphael said, one of his more exhausting qualities. She laughed, the real kind, sudden, unguarded. The laugh she had been saving for people who were safe. On a Sunday morning, she found her old notebook. the silver toxicity notes, margins filled with her careful handwriting. On the last page, something written at 2 a.m, 3 days after the funeral. Everyone deserves to be seen, not because of what they look like or what they're worth, just for being real, for being present, for staying. She took it to his study. He read it quietly. "You wrote this before we met." "Before I knew any of it was real. I wrote what I already knew. I just didn't know I was allowed to live it yet." He closed the notebook carefully and set it back in her hands. "Keep that for when you teach." He told her about Celeste that same morning, 1743, a woman who ran a boarding house near the waterfront. "She left food outside my door every morning for 3 months, never knocked, never asked anything. One morning she said, 'Whatever you are, you're not finished. The ones who are finished stop being interested. You're still interested.' She lived to 94. I attended every funeral of everyone she loved, from the back, without being asked." Angela looked at him. "He stood at the back of Nolan's funeral. He drove me home. He has been doing this for 300 years, showing up for the ones who are still interested." "You became her," Angela said, "in a way." "I hadn't thought of it that way." "Nolan would have. He would have made it insufferably poetic." "Yes," Raphael said, "he would." The locket was around her neck. She touched it the way you touch something that has become part of the body's daily inventory. Keys, notebook, locket. She thought of 12 books on an empty shelf. A spearmint leaf slipped under a door, the drying rack. When did it actually happen? The drying rack. The second morning, an empty plate, clean, placed with precision, by someone who had no obligation to acknowledge it, and had anyway. That was when I knew, not the grand gesture, the daily one. And she finally understood that love is not the thing that rescues you. It is the thing that keeps showing up, every day, in small forms, without being asked. She had started writing in a new notebook, not about vampire mythology, just things. The way the spearmint smelled at 9 in the evening, the specific voice Raphael used when genuinely interested in something, the sound of New Orleans from very high up in the dark. The nightstand had started, around week 3, to hold 2 mugs in the morning instead of 1. She had not announced this, neither had he. Some things don't need announcement. They need only the daily choice to keep being true, she would tell him. He would tell her where the texts were wrong. The evenings dissolved the way they always had, books open, tea cooling, the city outside the high windows. One evening, watching him read, she thought, it was never the safety, it was the presence. She said it aloud without meaning to. He looked up. "Never mind," she said. "I heard you," he said, and returned to his book. They sat with that, comfortably, in the way they had learned to sit with the things both of them already knew. Vera came on a Wednesday with 3 books and a theory she had been waiting weeks to say. The calming property in your blood maps to a specific ancestral line from the Louisiana coast. Something older than hunter blood, your mother's family. "My mother," Angela said. "It sits in the blood doing nothing until it's given a reason." Nolan knew, not the science, but he spent 3 years trying to understand it before he ran out of time. Angela looked at her own hands, same brown skin, same small scar on her left palm from a childhood fall. He knew there was something in me worth protecting. He protected it by sending it to the one person he trusted with irreplaceable things. "Thank you, Vera," she said. "You're going to be extraordinary," Vera said, with the certainty of someone delivering a weather report. "You already are. You're just catching up to it." The invitation to the solstice gathering arrived on heavy cream cardstock. Attendance by standing only. Standing meant you belonged in a room by right, not invitation. "Am I included in your standing?" Angela had asked. "You have your own, since the attack, since what you did." She wore the deep blue gown she had bought 2 years ago for an event she ultimately hadn't attended, hanging in her closet since then like a small, insistent argument that she was capable of being someone who went to things. She was, it turned out, capable of being someone who went to things. The Margrave house was a Garden District mansion that had watched 5 wars from its windows and remained unmoved. Inside, the supernatural world in its most formal register. Old faces on bodies that didn't age. The social grammar of people who have been navigating power longer than most nations have existed. Angela stood at Raphael's side and watched it with the quiet precision she had used her entire life to read rooms she wasn't sure she belonged in. The difference was that she no longer felt like she didn't belong. She felt curious. It was a significant distinction. A woman approached them midway through the evening, the wife of a vampire senator, silver jewelry, graciousness that was genuine and entirely practiced. "You're the one who made the antidote." "Yes." "And you study supernatural literature." "I'm finishing my graduate work at Tulane. I want to teach it." The woman recalibrated visibly. "I used to be a school teacher, 1887. The ones who didn't want to be elsewhere were the interesting ones." "What happened to them?" "Most became remarkable. All of them remembered that someone had paid attention." She moved on. Angela stood with that. She thought of herself at 16, reading over the phone with Nolan at 9, learning for the first time that adults can become past tense without warning. She thought of every teacher who hadn't looked up when she came in, and the 2 who had, whose names she still remembered. Paying attention, she thought, that's the whole work. She made a note to use that in her thesis introduction. He found her on the terrace. She stood at the iron railing with her blue gown and her new senses and the distant sound of a trumpet from somewhere in the direction of the quarter. Thinking about Nolan, not with the acute, breathless grief of the first weeks, with the slower ache of loss that has become love in a different form. Raphael came to stand beside her. He reached into his jacket and took out a small box. She opened it. A locket, gold, oval, engraved with 2 overlapping circles. One solid, one open, permanent bond, freely given. She opened it. On one side, Nolan's photograph, young, laughing at something outside the frame. The warmth of his handwriting somehow visible in his expression. On the other, a small folded paper. "You were never invisible. You are the light in my darkness." She stood with the locket in her palm and the paper in her other hand, and the trumpet still playing in the warm distance. "Nolan gave me the photograph before he died. He said to give it to you when you were ready." "The words?" she asked. "Mine," he said. She thought about a dying man, 34 years old, giving a photograph to the oldest person he knew and saying when she's ready, trusting without evidence, that both of them would arrive at the same place from completely different directions. He gave us time. That was his gift. She closed her hand around the locket. "Dance with me," she said. "Here. There's always music in this city. You just have to be willing to hear it." He held out his hand. She took it, cool, steady, the same hand that had held hers in the study, that had carried her to bed. They danced on the terrace while the old families watched from inside, and the trumpet played its beautiful, indifferent song from the quarter. Celia, warm, irreverent, the person in the room most likely to say exactly what she thought, appeared at the French doors and turned to her husband. "He's looking at her like someone discovering gravity." "About time," she said, and went back to her champagne. They walked part of the way home, far enough for the evening to settle into them the way good evenings do. He told her about James Baldwin, the first time he read Giovanni's Room, alone in Paris in 1957, understanding, for the first time, that literature could say the thing that couldn't otherwise be said about what it costs to keep your true self locked away. "Nolan gave it to me over the phone," Angela said. "He read me the part about the actual room and said, 'That's what it's like when you never let anyone in. The room gets smaller until nothing living can breathe in it.'" She paused. "I thought he was talking about himself. He was talking about both of us." "He was usually talking about everyone at once," Raphael said, one of his more exhausting qualities. She laughed, the real kind, sudden, unguarded, the laugh she had been saving for people who were safe. He looked at her briefly with the expression Celia had named. He didn't say anything. He didn't need to. The penthouse was quiet, warm, smelled of spearmint and old books, and the lived-in quality of a space that had stopped being a residence and become, without ceremony, a home. Angela stood in the main room and looked at it. The bookshelves, his, hers, increasingly mixed, her paperbacks migrating toward his first editions, the way things migrate when mine and yours starts to feel academic. The kitchen, where the copper pot lived on the second shelf, with the reverence of an object that had earned its position. The window in the corridor, thicker now, stronger, better than before. She thought of the first night, rain on the glass, "You don't have to marry me." She thought of everything that answer had turned out to contain. She found the notebook on a Sunday morning, clearing the kitchen shelf. The silver toxicity notes, her careful handwriting in the margins, and on the last page, something written at 2 a.m, 3 days after the funeral. Sitting on her apartment floor with Nolan's letter and a cup of tea, and the despair of someone who doesn't yet know what comes next. Everyone deserves to be seen, not because of what they look like or what they're worth, just for being real, for being present, for staying. She took the notebook to his study. He read it, was quiet for a moment. "You wrote this before we met." "Before I knew any of it was real, I wrote what I already knew. I just didn't know I was allowed to live it yet." He closed the notebook carefully, set it back in her hands. "Keep that for when you teach." He told her that same morning about Celeste. 1743, New Orleans. She ran a boarding house near the waterfront. I was not well then, the kind that comes from deciding nothing matters and acting accordingly. Empty in a way I had stopped finding notable. She left food outside my door every morning, never knocked, never asked anything, for 3 months. Did you eat it? Eventually, after 6 weeks of telling myself I didn't need it. Angela made a sound that was almost a laugh. One morning she was in the hall. She looked at me, the way she looked at everything, like she had decided to see it clearly, regardless of what it preferred, and said, "Whatever you are, you're not finished. The ones who are finished stop being interested. You're still interested." He was quiet. She lived to 94. I attended every funeral of everyone she loved, from the back, without being asked. Angela looked at him. He stood at the back of Nolan's funeral. He drove me home. He walked me to the door. He has been doing this for 300 years, showing up for the ones who are still interested. You became her, Angela said. In a way. I hadn't thought of it that way. Nolan would have. He would have made it insufferably poetic. Yes, Raphael said, he would. The flight happened at 11 at night, New Orleans below them, amber and dark and alive. She could see the cathedral from above, St. Louis, magnolias, the Tuesday of the funeral. From this height, it looked small, in a way that was not diminishing, but freeing. The way things look when you finally get above them. It's beautiful, she said. Yes. Does it stay beautiful across all that time? He thought about it. The things that stay beautiful are the ones you keep finding reasons to look at. The city changes, the people change. What you bring to the looking changes. That's not repetition, that's accumulation. She looked at the river. I'm using that in class. I assumed, he said. The locket was around her neck. She touched it the way she touched it now, not anxiously, the way you touch something that has become part of the body's daily inventory of itself. Keys, notebook, locket. She thought of the first night in the penthouse, the dress that didn't fit her world, the rain. She thought of 20 years of practiced smallness, of the vampire king who had agreed to marry his dead friend's chubby cousin because his word was the one currency he had never debased. She thought of 12 books on an empty shelf, a spearmint leaf slipped under a door, the drying rack. When did it actually happen, she wondered, the real moment. The drying rack, the second morning, the empty plate, clean, placed with precision by someone who had no obligation to acknowledge it, and had anyway. That was when I knew, not the grand gesture, the daily one, the one that required no audience and received none and happened anyway. And she finally understood, standing above New Orleans with the city glowing below and Nolan's photograph against her chest. That love is not the thing that rescues you. It is the thing that keeps showing up, every day, in small forms, without being asked. That is all it ever is. That is everything it is. She would remember that night not for the height or the speed, for the particular feeling of being entirely present in a moment she had not shrunk from, of taking up the whole space of it, of not apologizing for being there. She had started writing in a new notebook some weeks prior, not about vampire mythology or silver compounds, just things. The way the spearmint smelled at 9 in the evening. the specific voice Raphael used when genuinely interested in something. Different from his polite interest voice, the way Vera laughed at her own jokes before she finished them, the sound of New Orleans from very high up in the dark. She kept the notebook beside the locket, both on the nightstand that had started, around week 3, to hold 2 mugs in the morning instead of 1. She had not announced this, neither had he. Some things don't need announcement. They need only the daily choice to keep being true. The house felt different now, she would tell Vera, the following Wednesday. Not because of what happened, because of what I stopped waiting for. What were you waiting for? Vera asked. A permission to be in it, to take up the space, to stop apologizing for being present. She looked at her tea. I stopped waiting, that's all, I just stopped. Vera looked at her with the expression of someone watching a long transformation complete itself. Nolan would be unbearable right now, absolutely insufferable about being right. Angela smiled. Yes, she said, he would. This story reminds us that the people who have lived the longest through difficulty, who have sat with loss and kept sitting, who have made themselves small in rooms that never quite felt like theirs, those people are not finished. They are still interested, and the ones who are still interested don't need to do anything dramatic. You can start the way Angela started. Set a plate on a counter for someone who might not acknowledge it. Pull out the book you've been meaning to reread since before the hard years started. Write 3 things in a small notebook that remind you of what you still love, not what you've lost, but what is still here, still warm, still waiting to be noticed. The drying rack was enough. The spearmint leaf was enough. 12 books on an empty shelf, spines facing out, saying simply, I am here, I intend to stay. That has always been enough. If this story found you at a moment when you needed to be found, if any part of Angela's quiet courage, or Raphael's long way back to wanting things, or Nolan's extraordinary last act of love found something in you that needed finding, then it did what stories are supposed to do. It showed up. That's all. That's everything. This video is a work of fiction created with the assistance of artificial intelligence. All characters, events, and situations are fictional and do not represent any actual people or true stories. The content is intended solely for storytelling and emotional illustration.